Hey, welcome to our first video. We're going to be taking you through how to prepare and smoke a chuck rib rack. There are some chuck short ribs there. You can tell because there's 4 smaller bones as opposed to the 3 larger bones associated with a plate short rib rack, which we did a couple of weeks ago. But your first step here is you want to get everything patted down, nice and dry, get all that liquid off your cutting board and get the moisture off of the top of the meat. The other thing about a chuck rib rack is the extra hard fat you're seeing on the top there. While both this and the plate rib rack have some good marbling throughout, the chuck rib rack tends to have a little bit more of that hard fat on top. So our next step is going to be getting that fat off the top. You're going to want a sharp knife. You're going to want a cutting board that's pretty stable. And you're going to want to really get into that hard fat and expose as much of the meat on top as you can. That's going to help with getting your rub to stick and some great bark to form. So through the magic of fast forward, we'll go ahead and get that done and be right back. All right, we got our cleaned up rack. We got a great bit of meat exposed there on the top. Everything looked good the whole way around. So now we're ready to start preparing our binder and our rub. But first, got to give a quick shout out to the namesake of the channel, the Brisket brothers. Got the big Brisket brother here on secondary camera. Got the little Brisket brother and the medium Brisket brother there, giving moral support. Nice work, production team. Well done. Back to the chuck ribs. All right, so we're going to get this onto a tray so we don't make a mess while we get our binder and our rub on. We're going to be doing a simple binder and rub. We're going to be using a Worcestershire sauce as our binder. People use a bunch of different things: mustard, olive oil, hot sauce. Really do whatever you feel is best. And then for our rub, we're going to do something basic as well. We're going to do a 50-50 coarse sea salt, coarse ground pepper, and then do a touch of garlic powder and celery seed in there as well. For the purposes of this smoke, I think I did about 3/4 of a cup of each, the salt and the pepper. That's going to be your main components. And then do a 1.5 tablespoons of each, the garlic powder and the celery seed. Once you get that mixed together, you can get it into a shaker, and then you can get that ready to apply as soon as we get some Worcestershire on. All right, we got our rub in a shaker. That's about the color you want to see if you have the amounts just right. Move the knife out of the way so I don't shank myself on our first video. I'm going to take a little bit of Worcestershire sauce here. I'm just going to do just enough to get the top and the sides ready to soak up some of that rub. Don't need a whole heck of a lot, just a little bit. Get it on all sides. All right, now we have our binder on. We're going to use our shaker, and we're just going to get a light coating of this rub going around each of the sides here. The reason why we're doing a light coating is because we're actually going to let this sit in the fridge overnight before we throw it on the smoker tomorrow. In our experience, we found that this helps to create a fantastic bark when you go throughout your smoke. You may get another little bit of a dusting right before it goes on the smoker, just to make sure we have some even coverage. But having this salt-based rub on it the night before and letting it sit will help extract some of the moisture from the meat and create that nice coating that creates that firm and structured bark that you look for. with each of these smokes. So we're going to go through, get the rest of all these sides dusted up, and then we're going to get it wrapped. All right, we got our chuck ribs trimmed. We've got them bindered. We've got them rubbed. We have a nice light coat around all sides, straight up. We're going to get some plastic wrap on it, and that's going to go in the fridge to wait for the smoker in the morning. So I'll pick it up with you in a little bit when we start prepping our smoker. All right, it is about 7:30 in the morning. We have one of the barbecue dogs, Zoe, coming to say hi. Way to make your debut, Zoe. We're going to be setting up our Weber Smoky Mountain 22.5-inch today for this smoke. To do so, we're going to be using our chimney to get a couple of coals started with a Weber lighter cube highlighted there. And then we're going to put that in the middle of a minion method setup to allow that fire to make its way to the outside and maintain a longer smoke throughout the day. So we got our cube underneath. We're going to put in our Kingsford Blue. We're going to fill it about, I would say, between a half and 3/4 full. Don't need a whole lot of lit coals to start because we're not going to be kicking at a really high temp to start. Once we get that lit, we can let those coals get hot, and we'll be back in a moment. All right, coals are about where they need to be. We can go ahead and start getting the rest of the smoker set up. To do that, we're going to grab a couple of wood chunks and put them underneath where the rest of our coals are going to go. To start, we have 2 nice chunks of pecan wood there. Those are going to go on the outsides around the center piece there of the chimney. Once we get those 2 pieces in, we'll go grab another couple of pieces of cherry wood. These 2 pieces of cherry wood are also going to go around the outsides, smaller than knuckle sized or fist size. So 4 chunks usually does this pretty well. Once we have those set up, we can go ahead and pour the rest of our charcoal around the outside. Trying to do this with the lit chimney in the middle is always an adventure, but the bag didn't catch on fire, so we chalked that up as a win. You want to fill this up right to the cap of the circles. You want to make sure that you have enough charcoal in there so you don't have to throw more in throughout the day. And since we are planning on this being somewhere between a 7 and 9 hour smoke, we want to make sure it's able to sustain throughout the entire time. You get those wood chucks covered so that as the coals get hot, those wood chucks will start extracting smoke as we go through the later parts of the smoke. I'm going to go ahead and really try to burn myself by making everything even with a bare hand around that chimney. One of these days I'll learn. Also, if you have the option to not set up a smoker with flip-flops on, I would suggest that you take that opportunity. Once again, I'm going to touch hot coals with my bare hands. Again, something that you probably shouldn't be doing, but we're just going to try to make a little area in the middle here so we can pour our hot coals in. Before we do that, we're going to get one more chunk of cherry wood in there just to get us started off the get-go. Use that piece of wood to clear a little area, get that piece of wood down, and then you can go ahead and dump your hot coals right on top. Want to try to make sure they stay to the middle. Any wandering hot coals could prematurely light the outside ring. You really want to center that to the middle and let that happen naturally throughout the smoke. So this is the minion method setup. Once we have this looking pretty good, we're going to identify how the heat is going to make its way to the outsides. And then we can go ahead and put the rest of our smoker together. All right, we got our top piece put back on. We have our water pan about 3/4 full. We have our bottom rack in there with our probe thermometer. We're going to get our top rack put in and get that top put on, and we're going to get ourselves up to temp. Now for these chuck ribs today, we're going to be going for somewhere around 250 to 275 for our maintained temperature. All right, so we're back. We're getting close to around 225 on the lid. Our probe on the bottom is saying 205. Obviously, that one's going to come in a little bit lower than the top as it's sitting right above that 3/4 full pan of water. We're going to slow down the rising temp at this point to try to get ourselves to a balanced 250 once we do get there. We're going to do that by closing off some of these bottom vents. The rule of thumb here is you want each of these vents to be open just about enough to have a number 2. All right, we got our chuck ribs out of the fridge. As you can see, did some great extraction of some moisture there in the bottom of the pan. We got a nice looking thin coating still maintained around the outsides. This thing is ready to get on the smoker. Before we throw it on though, we're going to get just a touch more rub on there just to really get that nice crust on the outside. As you can see, a little top heavy with the salt there, so make sure you mix it up before you do that. Don't want to go too crazy, just enough to make it a nice complete coating. Pat that in with your hand, and then we're ready to get on. Our smoker's sitting right at 250 right now, looking really good. Grab our chuck ribs, throw them right there in the middle of the top rack, obviously bone side down. No need for a probe thermometer on these. We're going to be looking at the crust as our indicator of it being time to wrap. All right, so just wanted to do a couple of quick pics of how we looked throughout the progression of the smoke. Our first check-in was about 2.5 hours in. As you can see, we were really focused on ensuring that that crust was forming. We were spritzing with some cold water to allow the meat to absorb as much smoke as possible as we went through the rest of this process throughout the day. You want to do that maybe every 30 to 45 minutes after that first check-in. With this check-in, I think we were about 3.5 or 4 hours in. Temp was holding around 237 on that bottom rack. As you can see, still forming well. The meat's starting to pull back off the bones a little bit. We're getting a nice color. We got a brisket brother looking on. Again, you just want to kind of hit it with that spritz of water. Make sure it's staying as moist as possible. But progressing very well, looking exactly as we think it should through about 4 hours of the smoke. Make sure we get the brisket brother coated as well. There we go. All right, so this one is about 5 hours in. Now the brisket dog is looking for something. She gets a spritz as well. Brisket brother's still here. We got to make sure we get him again. There we go. All right, but this rib is still looking real good. We want to make sure we get another bit of water on there. One of the things that you want to make sure of, though, as you're doing these spritzes, is you want to make sure that you're not getting any pooling on top. As you can see here, we have a little bit of pooling of juice, both from the spritz and from the meat, kind of pooling on top there. So what you're going to want to do is just get your hand under there and let that run off a little bit, because what that's going to end up doing, if you leave it there, it has the potential of messing up that bark that we've worked so hard to solidify on top. So just tip it over, get that out of there. You can still hit it with a spritz every now and again. Just don't let it pool. We're getting some good bark here on the outsides now. We are almost ready for our wrap. All right, so now we're about 5.5 or 6 hours in. As you can see, our scratch test, if we go around the outside, in most of the areas, we're not picking anything else up. So we've got our bark to form. We have the color that we're looking for on the outside. We are good to go. So we're going to go wrap. All right, so for our wrap, we are going to do a combination of pink butcher paper and tin foil. As you can see, we have our rib here. Look at that color. It's exactly what we are looking for at this stage with that rub that we used. You can see it's got some great firmness around the outside. Nothing's coming up in terms of the bark or the rub. We're going to wrap it with a little bit of butter on top just to give it some extra fat and some extra flavor. You just put a couple of thin slices around the top of the meat there right before you wrap it up. I think in this case we did just about 2 or 3 tablespoons of butter into 7 individual pads. Or 6. Counting was never really one of my strong suits. So we're going to get a nice tight wrap here. Make sure you get all sides encompassed. That butcher paper, what it's going to do is it's going to absorb some of that moisture that's being created by the meat as we do the rest of the cooking process. That's going to preserve your bark. But the reason that we don't just do that is because we also want the component of the foil to help lock in that heat so that the meat gets nice and tender. Trying to find that balance between maintaining a solid and firm bark and also getting that meat nice and tender in the center is always a fun part of the smoking process. But in our last attempt with the plate ribs, this approach worked really well to do the butcher paper on the inside, then wrapped with the aluminum foil on the outside. So we're going to take our wrapped chuck rib now, and we're going to throw that in the oven. That oven is going to be at 285 degrees. If you'd like to throw it back on your smoker, you're more than welcome to do that, but the benefit really isn't there as we're using the butcher paper tin foil. You're not going to get any more smoke from that smoker getting into that meat. I think Harry Sue says it best, BTUs are BTUs. So we've had our chuck rib in the oven at 285 for just about 2 hours. At this point, you would take the foil up and use your probe thermometer to identify what the consistency looks like. All right, we got our chuck short ribs out of the oven. Our probe test identified that the texture of the meat is where we want it. There is little to no resistance as we probe through the meat between the bones. It feels like a warm knife going into butter, and that lets you know that the consistency of that meat is where it needs to be. If you're hell-bent on getting a temperature, you saw that the internal temp that we were working with there was 201. You want to aim for somewhere between 200 to 205. All right, we're going to get this thing flipped over, take a look at what the meat side of these chuck ribs looks like. We're just going to get the whole pancake flip over. Hope it doesn't fall apart. Luckily, it does not, and that is what you're looking for in terms of your bark and your meat side. You have an incredible amount of moisture coming out of that butcher paper. You have that butter. You have the juices from the meat. But even with all of that, you have a firm and solid bark on the outside that's going to bring a whole new level of that saltiness and that peppery flavor to the smoked meat. You're just going to want to check and see what the consistency of that meat feels like. You know, is it tender? We checked that with our probe before. Does it meet the temp requirements? We saw that with our thermometer before. You can even see we got a little bit of the meat jiggle going on here that you look for in your packer briskets sometimes. So we're in really good shape, and this thing's ready to rest. We're going to loosely wrap it up with some foil. We're going to go ahead and throw that into a cooler with some towels, and we're going to give it a little bit before we start cutting into it and see how it looks inside. All right, the moment of truth. So in total, we did 6.5 hours of direct smoke. From there, we pulled it off and wrapped it in butcher paper and aluminum foil combo and threw that in the oven at 285 for another hour and a half about. So it's a total of 8 hours of cooking. At that point, we wrapped it up in the foil loosely, put up some towels, threw it in the cooler. I think we rested for about an hour and a half as we came over to our friend's house here. And now we're going to take a look at what it looks like in the middle. We were working on our dismount here. At this point, the meat is very tender with some bones nearly falling out, so the dismount in itself was a task. The dogs were unhappy that I was able to land it. But we got it onto the cutting board, and now let's take a look at what we are looking at on the inside. As you can see from the outside, we have that great color on the bark, dark, crusted, not falling apart, not leaving residue. Exactly what we were looking for in terms of the bark. You can see as we're cutting, the consistency of the meat is great. We got some great jiggle. It's extremely tender. As you can see, it's already on that first bone that we're cutting off, separated from that bone. But we're going to get a good look at the middle in 1 second here. There you go. So as you can see there, we had some great smoke ring action. We can attribute that to a couple of things, whether it be getting it on the smoker right out of the fridge so it's cold, or whether it be the amount of time that we left it on the smoker there. We got a great smoke ring. As you can see there, as I'm bedding the meat, we're not getting a whole lot of juice pouring out like we do with the plate ribs, but you can see what the texture of the meat is, the bend that it has, and how tender that it is. We'll cut one more rib off here so you can see what the center looks like on the other side. Again, great smoke ring, great color, great consistency. Exactly what we were looking for. All right, now the moment of truth. What do the Brisket brothers think? First up, we got the big Brisket brother. We get a thumbs up. That's a big win right there because I don't believe that he was a fan of the plate ribs, so we'll take that as a W. Medium Brisket brother, what do you think? He says thumbs up. Again, I don't think that he was a big fan of the plate ribs either, so we're 2 for 2. Mini Brisket brother, yeah, I think he was hungry enough at this point he would have said he liked anything, but we'll take it. 3 for 3. All right, everybody, that puts a bow on our chuck short rib video. I hope it was helpful, but it was our first effort, so if there's anything you'd like to see with our future videos, let us know. We can talk less, we can talk more, we can put more of the Brisket brothers, more of the Brisket dogs. Whatever you guys want to see, let us know, and we'll include it in our future efforts. I do believe our next one is going to focus on a full packer brisket, so we look forward to having that up there, and thanks so much for watching.